All right, we wait for Chuck to return. I'm going to walk us through some of the opening material. Welcome to today's Clean Buildings Inspired Workshop on sections 7, 8, and 9 of ASHRAE 100. My name is Austin Scharf. I am the Legislative and Rules Coordinator for the Energy Division at the Department of Commerce. And I'm going to be walking us through the introduction of our presentation today and then hand the rest of the workshop over to my colleagues. Throughout today's workshop, we want to hear your feedback and answer your questions. For those of you online, we encourage you to send questions in the WebEx chat box. The chat box icon can be found by going to the bottom of your window and clicking on the blue circle with the text bubble in it. You should then be able to send your questions to everyone using the chat box on your screen. Please note that Chuck Murray will not be monitoring the chat box today. WebEx makes it difficult to do so when presenting a slideshow. So for convenience sake, please send your questions to everyone. This will ensure that we do not miss them. Anna Lindbergen will help me monitor the chat box, and she will read the questions aloud at question and answer periods throughout the presentation. We have also structured question and answer times throughout today's presentation. We want these times to be as interactive as possible. In the past, we have asked participants to use the raise your hand function and wait to be called on before asking their question. But today we will embark on a social experiment of sorts and ask everyone to simply unmute themselves when they have questions during question and answer times. If this does not work, we will go back to the raise your hand method. For those of you online, you can find the raise your hand button by opening the participants panel, which is to the left of the text bubble icon. Moving your cursor to the left of the mute/unmute icon in the participant panel, a symbol in the shape of a hand should appear. Clicking on the symbol will raise your hand. If you raise your hand, please unraise it once you have asked your question. That will help us identify participants who still have questions. Over the course of the Energy Division's Clean Energy Transformation Act webinars, it has come to our attention that the raise your hand function fails to appear depending on how you opened WebEx. If you do not have the raise your hand function, no worries. Simply unmute yourself and ask your questions during our question and answer sessions. For those of you who have joined by telephone, there's no option to unmute your phone and ask questions. If you would like to have the option to participate, we respectfully ask that you log into the workshop via computer or smartphone. With that, I am going to turn it over to Chuck Murray to discuss our agenda for the day and get us started. Chuck? If you would like to unmute yourself, you can get started. And Chuck, we are not picking up your headset.
Okay, try again.
We gotcha.
Okay, that's disturbing. Tough way to start the day. Everyone out there, we have a little echo I can hear, so folks need to make sure they're muted so that we don't get that echo. Hi, I'm Chuck Murray, Department of Commerce. Welcome to my home. I assume most of you are also logging in from home, and so we're hoping that everything's going well with folks, and we're glad to see you here. You know, I wanted to start simply by saying thank you to all the folks that are out there maintaining critical infrastructure. We've had a lot of good folks from the healthcare industry, food industry, folks making sure our energy supplies are flowing. And I have a good number of colleagues from Commerce that are out doing emergency management duties now, in addition to their regular work. So shout out to everybody. that's doing the good work. And for the rest of you, you know, I hope working from home's productive for you. Today we're going to jump into section 6, 7, and 8. Austin, let me know that you can see the screen of the presentation.
Yes, we have the presentation screen.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to dive right in. I will be pausing occasionally to allow folks to an opening to ask questions or provide comment. We're going to start with an icebreaker. This is a tough function here on our internet, but the simple question though, what's the weirdest thing you've eaten since you've been sequestered? You know, I'm sure we're all digging to the back ends of our kitchen cabinets and finding interesting things. For me, it's been asthenoth, which is a grain, and we mixed up some kind of weird porridge and added fruit, and that was new for me. So go ahead. You can check your comments feature to make sure it works and test drive it, as well as give Anna Lynn a little something to look at while she's monitoring the chat box. All right. So welcome to Commerce. Once again, we're an agency that provides a wide range of community services, which includes the State Energy Office, where this group is located. Just a reminder, any comments we make today about the specific rules are subject to change throughout the rulemaking process. That's why we're discussing it, to see if there's any changes that need to be made. Here's a reminder of our schedule. We were aiming for something like mid-June to post our official draft document. We're looking at our schedule, probably shift a little forward, you know, mid-July possibly. We have some fluff in the schedule, and we'll still have plenty of time for the required comment period that follows that. Once again, I want to remind folks of how to find our team. It's included here on the email address that you see posted here, as well as our webpage. And this reminds me to tell you folks that we have updated today's meeting agenda on our webpage to include 2 new documents. That includes the presentation I'm giving today, as well as an additional Word document. If you folks prefer to have those documents in front of you while you're reviewing, as well as watching what we're doing on the screen, that stuff's all available on our website, commerce.wa.gov/buildings. I want to remind folks where to read the comments that folks are submitting to our website. We are posting them in the upper right-hand corner of our webpage. You go in there and you're going to see folders for each comment period that we've had out in the public. You'll be able to find ideas in there that you might want to comment on yourselves, or simply keep up with the conversation that way. I want to once again stress the idea of making comments. You know, this first paragraph is here that's I clipped right out of the instructions that I put at the beginning of each of these comment drafts we post. So, you know, it's up to folks to write up stuff and send it in for it to be considered by us. We do try and pay a good deal of attention to folks during these meetings and capture what they've said, but it's really important that if you want to make a point, that you write it up and send it in. Specific proposals are most useful. General comments are difficult for us to address. They don't get the job done necessarily. And so I'm really encouraging folks to look at the drafts we posted, edit the drafts, you know, create new language that gets at what you folks are interested in seeing, and submit it to us. That's actually the best way to communicate about a standard, is to go edit the standard using standard crossout markup. I also want to just mention something, is that we've been I had a meeting with some folks at Higher Ed and David Van Hold, and they've gone the novel approach of getting together as a group to develop a proposal. And I'm going to ask David to comment on that. I see Norm's face on my screen here. Maybe he'll want to say something, but you know, tell us what you're up to and how that's going so far, David.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. Wonderful. That actually worked. You know, I'm actually going to quote something that Norm, a mentor, just sent me, which I thought was really well put. Since I only represent the group as a technical support, it's really being led and operated by the higher ed players in this game. So, you know, we're gathering a group, or they're gathering a group, to try to come up with a consensus proposal specific to the needs of campuses, and that the group is dedicated to alignment with the goals of the Clean Buildings Code and successful implementation of the standard within the unique parameters found in what we are defining as campus environments, meaning multiple buildings served by a single utility meter and/or energy distribution supply within the campus, thermal and electric energy flows behind the utility meter serving multiple buildings, including potentially bidirectional or matrix energy transfers and thermal storage within that system. And we're interested in partnering with Commerce to explore mutually agreeable processes that appropriately will access, analyze, engineer, and implement and measure compliance with these complex campus environments. The campus presents a set of unique challenges to this standard, and this group is focused on trying to come up with an appropriate way both to set the EUI and then to measure the EUIs and develop a campus energy management plan. So that's an example of an interest group that is gathered to try to help shape the language to deal with this special case. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, David. Once again, I asked David to talk simply because, you know, this work's underway and I thought folks ought to know about it, but also kind of illustrate how a group got together. They're trying to develop a very specific proposal. I had one meeting with them to kind of chat with them about it, and I'm glad to do that with others. But I also want to emphasize this is their proposal. This isn't Commerce. It's not WSU. These folks are the proponents of the proposal, and I hope to see some clear language from them that works within the context of the standard and that we can manage and implement. So thanks for the comment, David. I think that's that's my last slide before we get into the technical agenda today. Are there any questions or comments on the intro here?
Not in the chat box. But we have some good entries.
I bet we have some food there we can talk about. Yeah, okay. What do you see there?
Let's see. I think the canned haggis was the one that stood out the most. And if you don't know what that is, that's a Scottish dish with like onions and oatmeal and spices cooked in stock, mixed or usually encased in animal stomach. I'm not sure how it became canned. So, ew. I'm sorry. I don't know what.
We did pass St. Patty's Day this last month, so I can see where that might have come out of the cupboard. All right, give us one more.
Homemade pickled grapes.
Wow, that's nice. Who's our grape maker?
Brian Russo.
All right. All right, we'll read a few more of those if we have time later, but thanks for playing. I'm going to dive into the technical proposal now.
Hey, Chuck.
Yeah.
Before we do that, we've had a lot of people log in since we made our initial comments about how to provide feedback throughout the conversation. And so I just wanted to remind people that when we do have the different question and answer times throughout the presentation, that they can feel free to unmute themselves and participate, or submit comments in the chat box. And the other option is to raise your hand, which can be found next to the unmute mute button, and we will get to those people as well. Thanks, Chuck.
Great. And I'm going to intentionally pause occasionally to make sure that folks see the opportunity to comment. All right, thank you. So here's our technical agenda for today. It's the outline. It is based on the documents that we posted. I'm not going to, well, we're going to spend a little time here with this PowerPoint agenda to discuss a few items before we dive into the documents, but we're going to spend a lot of time working with the actual documents as well. So let me give a little background here on what I think are, well, the things that needed a little illustration to get us through the conversation. So starting with section 7, this is the target setting section. I wanted to highlight the multiple ways that folks can set their targets. I actually didn't understand how much flexibility this provided until I really dug in and started seeing if I needed any edits. And I actually think once folks start understanding the flexibility in target setting, they may actually feel a little better about all their mixed uses and odd types of buildings or odd spaces you have. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about all the different ways you can set a target for a building. And the first one is 7.2 by 2. This is the easy one. If the whole building has the same end use, it's, you know, the UIT, the energy utilization target. You take it out of the published table and you apply it to all the square footage in your building. So I think that's the easiest one. It's not particularly flexible, but if you have a single use, that's the way to go. Now, how do you do mixed use buildings? So we're going to start with the primary statement in the mixed use table. But then there are all these exceptions, which is where you get into your a little more flexible target setting. So the base case is that you do a weighted average of all the floor areas represented. You know, if a third of your floor area is retail and the remaining portion is office, it's retail floor area times UIT, and it becomes, well, times 0.3. So you come up with a fraction, and then it's office space UIT divided by floor area times, you know, whatever the remaining fraction is. And that's how you add. And the formula is in the book, and it's just some basic math on how you area weight the floor area. So that's the base statement, but let's get into the exceptions now. So exception 1, spaces where more than 75% of the gross area has a building activity listed in the reference table shall be reported as a single use building. Now this is if you choose to take the exception. Remember, when you're reading a code book, the exceptions are they're options other than the rule that you can take. So an example that might be useful to folks is we have all this warehouse space that's probably, let's assume it has much lower energy use than the office space. You get to call that all office space. Your target is based on the office target. So for some folks, this is going to be beneficial. For other folks, that smaller space, if it was a fast food restaurant, I wouldn't do this because that fast food restaurant's probably got a better pathway through one of the other exceptions. So exception 2 says that the qualified person that's creating this UIT for spaces less than 10% of the gross floor area of the building, the activity listed in 7.1 can be combined with the floor area within the building that has a similar building activity. And I added a little comment in italics there. I think that means something with a very similar UIT. So, so if all you had was general office and some outpatient healthcare, they have approximately the same UIT. You can just use the office UIT. At any rate, that allows, once again, some additional flexibility. It's so the building owner doesn't have to go figuring all of the different spaces quite so diligently. But once again, my interpretation is those things have to have similar EUIT in order to do that. And if you look through the table, there's a good number of activities with similar EUITs. Exception 3. So this is a combination of a building with activities listed in table 7-1 and a non-listed building activity. So if that non-listed building activity is less than 10% of the floor area, it can be excluded from the building energy target calculations if the energy use of that space is metered. So basically, you're going to be able to take that out of the building's EUIT. And so this could apply to a data center that's buried in office. It could apply to, one of the university's weird energy intensive experiments. You get to just say, we're going to ignore that. Compared to the size of the building, it's a relatively small space. Now, you adjust the EUIT for the office based on the office floor area, and you still have to report on that. But if you have a meter on that weird gizmo and the energy serving that space, you can just carve that out. Finally, this one's allows you to trade, do partial audits of a building. So I have to remind folks that if your building doesn't have a listed EUIT, it automatically falls into the audit and improve category. What this exception does is it allows you up to 50% of the building floor area to have a non-listed space, and you can qualify the listed space using the UIT. And then what's left, the not listed space, you can just go do a partial audit of your facility. So that's going to save you on audit charges. It has to be a metered space so that you can separate the energy, which I know is, not always enabled for everything, but it allows a lot of flexibility to take care of once again, the unusual spaces that aren't listed within the context of the standard. And I'm going to show you some specific language that's in the standard that I've tuned up a bit to actually make it easier to read, I think. So now I'll pause and I'll ask folks if they have any questions about this target setting that I just talked about.
Hi, Chuck, it's Annalyn. I'm just giving people time to kind of type in anything, but I don't see anything new.
All right, thank you. I'll give them another second here.
And anyone who wants to join in the conversation, please feel free to do so, or use the raise your hand function, which is next to the mute unmute icon, and we'll call on you.
It's Norm Mentor. I have a question. Are you considering, or you may want to consider in the rule, some type of direction to folks on how to treat sport space, right? Like, so an office building will have a significant amount of its floor area that's taken up with circulation space and hallways and bathrooms and elevator cores and stairwells and lobbies. I'm assuming that in your description here, you're saying, of course, all that is considered support for the office function, so therefore it's the office function. What gets complicated is when you have multiple uses within a building, how do you attribute that support space to the listed functions?
So you just introduced my next two slides. No, that's great. I mean, if it works that way, I'm always happy. I'm going to follow up on that one, but let's see if there are any other questions before I move off of this subject.
I have no other questions at this time. So.
All right. You can stew on it and ask later. Your time has not expired. So if I could get my screen to sit still, I'll let it come up on your screen.
Hey, before you, yeah, we'll let that set. We do have one question came in on a comment.
Sure.
The question or comment reads, excluding those small energy intense spaces, while reasonable, may leave owners with no incentive to implement readily available energy efficiency improvements, i.e. data centers.
Understood.
One more question. For exception 3, do you amend the overall building area to carve out the non-listed spaces?
Yes, you do. I have created text that says that doesn't change the size of your building, though. That requires you to go through the process. I'll show you that when we get to the text.
That's all the questions we have at this time. And anyone who submits any afterwards, we can come back to.
So one of the additions I made to the standard in our draft was to make sure we understood what the floor area of these non-target spaces were. And so I added the text you see there, spaces shall be limited to the floor area occupied by the non-target activity and shall not include supporting spaces such as halls, common areas, and other space types listed in table 7-1. Now, when you do an Energy Star portfolio manager assessment, all those, it's gross floor area, right? So if you're serving general office space, all the halls and the elevators and any kind of, the mail room, all that stuff is part of the general consideration of the office. The only way I'm at all comfortable with exception 3 is that we've confined it to this limited definition of what an exceptional space is. Section 4 is a little more less generous in that you would still have to audit the space. Now, with respect to the comment we just got about data centers, I agree. A data center could be a relatively small floor area and a big impact on total energy. There's also lots of opportunity for savings in data centers. So if folks want to send in a comment, I'm working off the standard as it's published. If folks feel strongly that there are certain spaces that need to be audited rather than excluded in exception 3, well, I had that thought. I didn't execute on it. So if we get a consensus around that, perhaps we could. So I also want to bring up IT infrastructure and what's an excluded space versus what's typical data infrastructure in an office building or a university building or wherever it is. It's we have IT of all scales scattered all about all our buildings. And our EUIT is based on the energy use of buildings that have all that stuff. So while you might be able to carve out your highly intensive data center, and I actually think that's fair, I would not want folks carving out all the small data closets and everything else. Now, what I've done here is copy the definition of data center from Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And it includes the high density equipment, dedicated power and cooling systems, fairly high constant load. It has a UPS, which is where most of this stuff gets metered. And it likely has raised floors or some way to create a, that cooling system that specifically cools the racks in the system. This is not a data center or a data closet where it's, using the building HVAC system to cool a couple of servers. So I have yet to write a specific data center definition. I think if I did, I'd probably rely on what's called the ASHRAE standard 90.4 that has been adopted as a standard within the context of our state energy code. So now I also, at the headline there on my presentation, I said, this principle applies to other end uses. I'm perfectly willing to allow this for anybody that has an unusual use. It's a good exception for all those spaces. But we can't use it casually. If there's typically, well, here I'll use healthcare. If a hospital typically has one CT scanner, that's in your base energy use. If a typical hospital, if you have an unusual situation where you're doing research and you have, 6 CT scanners, and some of them are the kind that do really energy intensive continuous monitoring for research purposes, sure, that's a different case. But it's in your hospital, I'm expecting that you probably have a scanner or some of that sorts of tech equipment. So now I'm not going to try and create rules around all this stuff, but I am discussing the meaning of what these exceptions mean. So, and if folks think we need better definitions and a little better instructions to make sure we get through that pathway, we can make the effort and get that done. Any comments? Yeah.
Yeah, Chuck, this is Norm. So I think that the 10% rule is important to keep in there. And I think it would be fair that there should be some clarification on this is for, in the world of the university research facility, where this comes into play is we've got something called Kirsten Wind Tunnel. And when they turn on the fan at the wind tunnel to do experiments around aerodynamic draft on airplanes, it uses a tremendous amount of energy.
Yeah.
There's no way we can recover that energy. There's no opportunity like there is in a data center where the load is 24/7, 365. These are really highly variable electrical loads with a lot of wasted energy, but it's truly a process load.
That's right.
That would be appropriate for the exception, whereas actually the data center is the opposite opportunity. It's want to develop the EUIT for the building specific to the fact that it has that very energy intense use in it. Similarly, in hospitals, I think we want to capture those very intense loads, like a surgery suite that needs to have a higher EUI because its function demands it versus a patient room that has a lower EUI. So in that case, so what I'm trying to say is this exception's okay as long as we make it clear it's for loads that are intermittent and not useful to the overall energy engineering of the building.
Yeah, and there's a lot of gray area in there that perhaps we need to work on. I get it. I get it. I'm not going to try and write a rule for everything. You know, we're going to have to allow people some flexibility.
Right. And I think energy engineers will use their best judgment. What I'm advocating for is don't throw the exception out because somebody might abuse it.
Oh, I wouldn't plan on throwing the exception out. It's well, here's a, you know, a data center is currently not a listed space in table 7-1. So I don't have an EUIT, and so it falls under that rule. So, you know, that's what we're working with here. All right. Any other comments on? That's all I'm going to provide presentation for in section 7. We're going to look at the document in a few minutes. Any comments on what I presented, or should we keep moving here?
You might have covered this already, but someone asked what was the percentage exception floor area? Is it 10% max?
10% max.
Okay.
Okay. So I just have a couple of updates that I thought I'd illustrate here on 8 and 9 and what we just posted, which is normative Annex X. We were able to draft that up a little further than when we published our original stuff. First, if folks have reviewed this ahead of time, you'll notice that we've replaced the audit manual that was referenced in ASHRAE Standard 100 with their new audit manual, which is actually written in standard format. As a standard, it's written much more clearly, and the details are great. ASHRAE's statement when they published this standard is it replaces the Commercial Building Energy Audit Handbook. And so we're simply you'll see us moving this standard into our adopted text, as well as you'll see us starting to use this standard as a reference to some of our auditing and economic criteria. So that's why those changes occurred. It's a much better book. And I think in general, it serves us very well. Once again, this is a proposed change. If anybody has comment on it, let us know. I just wanted to point out a couple other reference standards. Once again, the standard 211 is in play when we're doing economic analysis. And we're also referring to the life cycle cost manual from NIST. This manual was published way back in '95. It was very well done. They've never updated it, and it's not because they don't use it. They use it all the time. It's a good book, and whenever we develop any tools for implementation, we're just going to be using the formulas and methodologies as they're laid out in Handbook 135. And so I'm going to now transition to looking at section 7, 8, 9. If I do this correctly, I can just drag it over here. Whoops, that didn't work. All right. Sorry, folks, this is the tedious part. We're going to start reading standards. I have made a few comments in the border to help folks read this. A little rationale for some of our decisions. It's by no means the full story. but it helps folks out a little. In the first section, we'll have to update this section once we get our UIT tables from SBW. But, you know, basically I'm striking all the tables except for 7-2A for targets. That is your site energy use table. This next piece that I've redlined extensively is the description of how the ASHRAE committee developed their set of targets. Our set of targets are using a similar methodology, but we'll need a new paragraph there once the work is done. I heard somebody talking in the back room. If you were trying to get in, I'll pause for a second. Okay. So I edited the section where it says who develops the UIT. And here it says the energy manager or qualified person. However, in chapter 4, which is the charging chapter for the regulation, it says the qualified person. Also, based on feedback I've gotten from folks that are doing energy benchmarking programs and the Seattle Building Tune-Up program, the qualified person really is the go-to for this kind of work. The energy manager has all sorts of management functions that are very useful to this process, but they're not the experts that can get this UIT correct. So for those reasons, I've limited it to the qualified person. So once again, 7.2.3 are the energy targets for buildings with multiple well, I skipped one, single activities. Okay. That's top of the page here. Single activities, very simple formula. Based on the building gross floor area and the target in table 7-2A. I did not edit the primary charging language for energy targets for buildings with multiple activities. I did do a little handiwork on the exceptions, however. Because we have a regulation that applies this to the gross floor area of buildings greater than 50,000 square feet, I've added this note to make it clear that all these exceptions don't modify the total building square footage that qualifies a building to participate in the program overall. So say you got to exception 3 where you scrap 10% of the floor area. If that took you below 50,000 square feet, my opinion is that building's still a participant. And that's why I made that the change I've highlighted up there. That's something that wasn't considered by the ASHRAE committee, so they didn't, you know, think that through. So our team talked to the authors of this standard, a group of 5 of them, not the whole committee. to get some opinions about what some of these words meant in the standard. And one of them was, what does this unique building activity mean? And I asked them two questions. I said, does it mean any building, or does it mean any building activity, or does it mean building activities listed in 7-1? And the committee was very clear. They said it's the stuff listed in 7-1. And they'll probably adopt this the next time they edit their book. They appreciated my comment, actually. So this only applies to activities that are listed. That's true also with the exception 2 that we talked about. So the change I made is to make sure we understood what unique was. It meant buildings listed in, or building activities from table 7-1. Exception 3, there are principally no changes in exception 3 from what was published, except I did add a sentence about the non-target spaces shall be limited to the floor area occupied by the non-target activity. So I discussed that in the previous presentation, but here it is within the context of the rule. Now, I changed the language in section 4 quite a bit. This is where I made sure with the ASHRAE committee that their comment was this is still consistent with what they meant when they wrote this. And I'm going to unredline it here so that folks can read it. And I'll tell you why it didn't work for me. First problem is it doesn't tell you what to do with the rest of the building. Okay, remember my descriptions with the illustrations is you still have to meet the UIT for the rest of the building. In this case, they forgot that part. And it lived right up there in section 3. They had it right. And all I did is port the language on what you do with the rest of the building to this language. Also, they made this an or case. Well, they made this 10 to 50% of the building, which I simply, and it's because they were trying to compensate for the fact that somebody had the option to do number 3. Well, this allows you to kind of roll number 3 floor area into exception 3 floor area into exception 4 in my edit. So that was the original language. It had some problems in my mind. I hashed this new language out with the committee and they thought it was pretty good. First of all, it's everything up to 50% of the building floor area can go this route. All of that area has to go through the energy audit and upgrade. But then here's the statement, the remaining part of the building shall be calculated after deducting the unlisted floor area. I thought that was essential in order to make a complete statement about what you do in this section. At any rate, then I tagged on once again my non-target spaces commentary here. At any rate, are there any discussion about the language as I've written it, or?
Yes, we have a couple of questions, Chuck.
Okay.
Going back, can you clarify if the qualified person is typically someone credentialed, like a PE, CEM, etc.?
I will try and find that quickly here. It's in your standard. See if I can get this on screen. Okay. Here I am. Oh, I don't have it connected to the internet. Yes, it's a qualified person. Luke, could you look up qualified person and read it out loud for us? I don't have access to a standard right here. Maybe I do. Hold on.
Okay, so while Luke is looking that up, let's move on to the next question.
Sure.
Is the ASHRAE 7.1 table modified by this code and therefore has many less named activities?
We don't know how many activities will be listed. There may be fewer, but we're also going to tell people how to map all the Energy Star sub-uses to that table, so that a lot of those subsets will certainly have a target. That's work's going to be done by SBW, and all I can say is we'll have to address that particular issue when we get that draft published. I don't expect there to be significantly fewer listed spaces. They'll simply, they may be categorized differently. What end uses fit in a particular target may be a little different, but I think there's going to be lots of listed spaces.
All right. Luke, did you get a chance to look that up? If not, I'm just going to move on to the next question. All right. How does one deal with building activities such as hospitals that typically include other listed activities such as office and outpatient clinic in their normal makeup? Do you have the option of calling all the space a hospital or breaking it into separately listed building uses?
You have the opportunity to separate it. You can call the whole thing a hospital, or you can use subsets such as, hospital, clinic, and office. So you could allocate your floor area that way. Each of those areas would be area weighted. So that is covered under the primary multi-use building scenario, which says, says you can call it all one space or you can call it multiple spaces.
Okay, Austin, can you unmute Luke for me? He has our answer.
Yes, I can. Let me find him here.
Or Luke could just post it in the chat box.
Yeah. So, I was going to post it in the chat box, but my Microsoft Word is not working.
Okay.
So, in lieu of typing it all out, I thought I would read it to you. So, a qualified person, a person having training and expertise in building energy use analysis. Any of the following: a licensed professional architect or engineer, or licensed contractor in the jurisdiction where the project is located, a certified energy auditor or manager, or lastly, a person qualified by the AHJ or authority having jurisdiction.
So I want to remind folks that I've encouraged people to look at what I've called the cast of characters. Energy manager, qualified person, energy auditor, and determine if there are other qualified people that ought to be put in those places. Also, I think particularly with respect to a commissioning agent, have we got that definition consistent, say, with the qualified commissioning agent in our energy code? So the cast of characters, the definitions that are in the standard are important. And if folks have good comment on changes that should be made to those definitions, write them up and let us know.
Another one came in. Are there any exceptions for special equipment which may have a high energy usage, like diagnostic imaging equipment that is not available at all hospitals? Reason for the question: wouldn't want research hospitals or hospitals capable of meeting complex needs, level 1, level 2 trauma centers, to be energy outliers and therefore have increased burden to meet EUI if percentage of their energy usage is for specialized equipment that they are required to have to provide services in their community?
Right. So I think that's what exception 3 or 4 are good for. Yeah, interpreting what is normal in a hospital and what is exceptional is out of our area expertise, and so we'll need some help on that. So if folks have specific things that we could define, similar to what I showed you with what's a data center versus all the other data stuff in an office building, I think that would be useful for everyone. But we don't have any expertise there, and I don't think we're going to be able to dive in. However, that is your business, and perhaps you can help us with that.
That's it for now.
Okay. So once again, I want to say there's a lot of flexibility in those, particularly those last two exceptions. All I did to 7.2.4 energy targets for vacant and partially vacant buildings was add, once again, my statement that this doesn't change the total gross floor area as it applies to reporting to Commerce. Basically, you can't subtract your vacant space and all of a sudden your building doesn't have to report at all. You still have to do the reporting and participate in the program. So, tables. This book, the original version, is full of different ways you can look at the EUIT of buildings. Our legislation specifies that will be site energy use. So let me, table 7-1, which is simply the list of building types. That'll be modified as part of our target setting work. 7.2a is the site energy use by, site energy use in IP units, EUIT. 7-3 are the operating shifts normalization factors. A building that operates under 50 hours has a different target than one that opens, 24/7. This is a factor applied to compensate for that. And then all other tables in section 7 we will not be using. So it takes about 15 pages out of your book. So with that, I'm done reviewing the comments I made on section 7. Last call for any questions here.
We have one that came in. Isn't there a requirement that new buildings have different targets? How does that fit in?
Correct. We will be having a target specific to new buildings. I hadn't thought about it here. We probably need to put in here new buildings someplace. I don't know if it's a new target or if it's a adjustment factor.
Just giving them a moment to type up anything.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts on whether or not the building operating shifts normalization factor table is going to be changed to add in different hours and stuff? Like,
the consultant's reviewing those in the context of their work to see if any changes need to be made. I don't know the results of that work. It is being examined.
Okay, we have one that came in. You plan to use the portfolio manager definitions and criteria for calculating GBSF.
I think so. I'm almost certain they're the same. We have to use the gross building floor area definition from either our law or our law refers to the state energy code. I forget which one. I'll look for that. It's very similar to the Energy Star definition, if not the same. All right, I'm going to move on to section 8, which I didn't do a lot.
Chuck,
Right.
just another one came in.
Okay.
How do we account for parts of a building? How do we account for parts of a building will be operating at different times? We may have an urgent care in a building that is 24/7 while other parts of the building have more standardized operating hours.
So your target by space is adjusted by the building operation shifts normalization factor. So you'll have a target for a hospital, and you could apply the shifts operating normalization factor to that. And then you look at your office and you look at the shifts in your office and you adjust the target number there. And so each of them does have an individual, schedule. Once again, that's here. I'll zip up here. It's embedded in the formula here. It's the SI in the formula in the book. And you'll see that the SI is in the middle of each space calculation. So yeah, get out your freshman algebra book and try a few calculations.
That's all we've got.
Okay, moving along. 2 o'clock, we're doing pretty good on time. I'm actually gonna, everybody close their eyes because I gotta rip through this and remind myself what I need to talk about here. Okay, I'm gonna give an introduction about the main things going on here, and then we'll move through the text. First, Washington State has a unique economic evaluation criteria that we needed to incorporate in the standard. We're doing that by developing normative annex X. We'll renumber that once we figure out exactly where it fits. And so a lot of what we've done here is simply improve that reference, making sure people know what to do. The standard is, for the most part, silent on what you do with a building that has no metering. And we think that the buildings with no metering are the same as buildings with no targets, with a few exceptions. And for buildings without metering, how do you measure success after you've done the projects? Or how do you establish the energy baseline for a building with no metering? That would be inconsistent with the standard. I've added a little text here to cover that situation. So those are the main things I've done in here. I've changed some references to the newer ASHRAE standard. Oh, one other thing. I think a number of engineers warned us of this early in the process, that in order to do the economic analysis required in our law, we're going to have to require some level 3 audit components. And so you'll see us moving some level 3 audit components into the standard. All right, with that introduction, let me move through here. So we understand that there are kind of 2 sets of buildings here that have to do the energy audits and upgrades. They're either buildings with energy targets or buildings that don't comply with the standard, and there's buildings without energy targets. First statement here basically says that, you know, if you meet your target, you're done. You don't have to do this section. That's a place everybody would love to be. The following is the overall process for buildings that don't meet their energy targets. Basically, the standard begins with the premise that, well, you're going to work until you hit your energy target. And you're going to do it by doing the audit and implementation protocols in sections 8 and 9. And for the most part, we haven't changed that. Except where did we do that? Except for making sure we reference section 9, which does tell you. That's where we've posted our allowance to do the economic criteria evaluation to get out of doing all the measures and limiting it to only the measures that are cost effective. So the standard allows you to use older energy audits completed in the previous 3 years. You are going to have to follow the procedures of number 9, section 9. Once again, we're reminding people that they have to do an audit that's been upgraded to incorporate the economic evaluation criteria required by the standard. It's not stated here, but that's what happens when you get to section 9. All we've done in section 8.4 is change the reference standard from the commercial building energy audit book to standard 211. And we've added the level 3 audit standard, which a little later on we show you how that's applied. So audit results. This is for buildings with targets, of course. We're still in that section. And basically, once again, the baseline standard says that you're going to meet the standard. You're going to keep doing this work till you get it right. Our state law and now our draft section here. Whoops, I'm in a different place. I apologize. I'm off subject. All right, audit results. This tells you, well, I'm going to read this for a second, make sure I'm in the right place. Right, so this is where I introduce the idea of buildings that don't have comprehensive energy metering. And essentially, we're telling people that it's the same pathway for building types without targets. So if you don't have energy metering, you're going to have to do the energy audit and improvement protocol. The next statement is the simple payback and the savings to investment ratio. SIR is our legislative required metric. We have incorporated simple payback in one of our steps along that road, and we'll show you that when we get to our economic evaluation criteria. This is where we direct folks to use normative Annex X, which is our economic evaluation criteria instructions in order to evaluate, you know, how to get through the that part of the process. Once again, not editing a great deal in chapter 8. So end use analysis. Every energy audit begins with an understanding of whole building energy use. If you have meters, you start with your metered energy and you try and understand how all the end uses in your building account for that energy use. For buildings without meters, we've added this section. For buildings without without comprehensive metering and energy engineering estimate of the historical baseline energy use based on the existing building system and operating condition may be used for end use analysis only. Once again, that only applies to this one step in the process where you get to estimate your baseline energy use. It cannot be used as a qualifier for anywhere else in the standard. So they basically give you an outline of what level 1, level 2, and I've added level 3 audits here. The instructions they provided here are general in nature. And just to remind folks, we've referred you to the audit standard 211 up above, which is where the details kick in. This standard only provides really general instructions on how this works while referring you to these other handbooks. All right. I kind of fumbled on my way through that section. If anybody has questions or wants me to repeat anything, now is your chance.
Chuck, this is Norm.
Yeah.
Can you go back over time? Buildings that have an EUI target, listed target, but don't comply with the target, complete their energy audit, and then they implement everything until they reach the target?
Well, so that's what the base standard says. We've inserted the language that refers you to our normative Annex X, which allows folks to simply do what's determined to be cost effective.
Okay, great. Can you, I know maybe I'm jumping ahead again, can you describe a little bit the components of the level 3 audit that are needed for the economic analysis? Is this similar to an investment grade audit level of
it is.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
And one of the reasons we're selecting this standard 211 is it has a very good set of instructions on what each of these means and what the parts of the audit are. So I think you'll find it refreshing compared to that other book that are not quite as direct in their language.
Yeah, it's I mean it's totally reasonable to level of engineering to be able to accurately test the project. Obviously, we wouldn't execute without doing that level of analysis, and as soon as we do that level of analysis, we would be able to have a submittal for you that would prove or disprove the cost effectiveness of the measure. The difficulty is that in the audit process, you identify a lot of things that could be cost effective, But you can't do an investment grade audit on all those items in a single funding cycle or project cycle. And so we could get caught up on spending doing scoping to determine the economic hurdle on projects that can't be completed for 24 to 36, 48 months out. And the conditions will change on those projects in the meantime. So it's a problem. Maybe it's a small thing in the relative order of magnitude of what you're trying to deal with, but for building owners, it's all about timing. So maybe that's more in how and when do you submit your proof of compliance, I suppose.
And the law, and we've written some language later on about delayed implementation and how we'd like that reported. So the law allows you to phase stuff in. And we think we got some language on that coming up.
Okay, good.
The other, you recognize it a bit, but I'm going to put a point on it here. A level 3 audit has already, all the measures have already gone through the steps of level 1 and level 2. And there's a lot of opportunity there to, eliminate things that don't look like they're going to be cost effective in the end. So that level 3 scrutiny is for your most promising work.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, and I think that is, and I think that's fine. I think that's a linear process, provided the compliance, what we get caught up with the city of Seattle on tune-up ordinance is that level of documentation to keep the regulator appraised of the changes that occur in the status of a identified ECM or EEM, a period of months and sometimes, crossing boundaries into multiple years, is a bit of a documentation nightmare. You really get caught keeping the log accurate with all the changes that happen. That's more in the administration of compliance than it is in the concept here. It's a solid concept. You have to be able to move from level 1 to level 2 to project execution. So nothing we can do about that.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
We have one here. Can you provide clarification on why each energy efficiency measure must meet the savings to investment ratio rather than the bundled EEMs?
Well, so you're going to see when we get to further down, chapter 9 is more about what gets adopted. And our law states that individual measures that don't pay for themselves, folks don't have to do it. So part of the level 2 audit process is that if a measure essentially doesn't have a simple payback that's shorter than the life of the measure, you don't have to do those. So that's your first filter. And then what happens next is you create a bundle where you do the more detailed economic and energy analysis. That's our interpretation of what both the law and the audit process would dictate. Once again, if folks have another idea, let us know. I'll show you that when we get to some text that's in Chapter 9 and the normative annex.
Okay. Here's another one. Please address during this presentation if the economic effectiveness cost criteria includes the business interruption of doing the EAM work.
I'm not sure that's as explicit as you might like. We can look at that. The way we've tried to mitigate that is allow phased implementation. We may not have it described in the way you just did. So when we get there, let's talk about that a little.
Hey, Chuck. Would it be possible if we all decided to take a 5-minute bathroom break?
I think that's a fine plan. All right, you're going to see me disappear. Let's make it
Should we make
2:31 on my clock. Let's make it 2:40. How's that sound?
that? Sounds good.
All right, folks. We'll see you back here in a few minutes.
And if you'd like to, on your break, you can look over the rules and pose any questions in the chat box. Thank you.
Amy, who's that with you?
Mira, helping
Hi,
me.
Mira.
All right, she's doing.
No comments today?
Not for Mira, no.
Okay, thank you. Just checking in.
Thanks.
All right, so here's a can of, I believe it's, David, you're going to have to talk if you want to be the big picture on the screen. So say something so your can is blown up.
David, I think you're on mute.
David's muted. I'll unmute you, Dave. Oh, there he is.
There we are. Sorry about that. Got so excited. The Caledonian Kitchen Premium Quality Haggis with Highland Beef. This comes right out of Scotland. Oh, no, I take that back. Texas.
Right out of,
It's got the
Some-
Scottish
some-
lion, but
some Scotsman from Texas put that
it's actually
together.
quite good. This is
So is there a whole stomach in there, or?
no, negative. There is no stomach in this. This is what is in the stomach. So it's less the stomach.
Okay,
Very good.
that's just short of a haggis then. Okay.
That's what I eat, lad.
Well, thanks for sharing, David.
You're most welcome.
So our time is up for our break. So I want everyone who went to the fridge and got a beer or made a cocktail to raise their hands. We got to count who's taking advantage of working at home. I did not. As a presenter, I thought that was inappropriate. Oh, Anna Lynn has raised her hand. That's good. All right.
I wish I had thought of that.
Well, obviously I did, right? Okay, so we're moving on to implementation and verification requirements. It's actually quite a short chapter because it refers you to other documents. Basically, 9.1.1 tells you which sections you have to go to and connects these requirements back to the energy management plan. The edited sections here are buildings with energy targets and buildings without energy targets. And the first thing you see is 4 buildings with energy targets is the exception to, once again, getting below the energy target. The exception being may demonstrate compliance by implementing all the EEMs that achieve the financial criteria in normative Annex X. So basically it gives you that exception to use the economic criteria that we're developing. For buildings without energy targets and buildings without comprehensive metering, we basically direct you to normative Annex X in all cases. So I've deleted all the other text that was in these sections. They were a variety of economic criteria. I guess the one thing I did that I should probably allow people to see a little better and comment on if they care to. this particular paragraph allowed buildings without energy targets to achieve their goals within 4 years of the application of compliance. I scratched that because I think we've given adequate amount of time notification to people to engage and do this work. We'll be notifying people in 2021 or work that needs to be completed at the earliest in 2026. So I think we've given everybody fair warning, and we don't need to implement this particular line. That's a decision I made that, of course, you folks can ask me to reconsider.
Chuck, this is Norm. I'd just say that, you know, there's going to be some kind of penalty phase if what I'm thinking of is when you submit your building for compliance, there may be differences between what the owner feels is compliant and what the reviewer thinks is compliant. So there would be potential for activities to happen after the deadline.
Yeah.
But I don't think it needs to wait 4 years for compliance.
Yeah, and compliance doesn't mean that you're done with everything.
Right.
Necessarily. So keep in mind compliance, you can get conditional compliance where you continue to monitor energy use and install measures past that initial reporting date. And there's a little better description of that as we move through here.
Right.
A lot of what Chapter 9 does, so Chapter 9 basically points you back to the work you did in Chapter 8 and says implement it. It also repeats a bunch of the stuff that the energy manager is supposed to do in Chapter 5. The only edit I made there is the commissioning. We've already discussed aligning that with the commissioning requirements of the state energy code, which you would have to do anyway. So, we had a question earlier about minimizing disruption for building occupants and such. This section 9.1.2.4 has language on that. It basically says EEM shall be prioritized to take advantage of life cycle of building system and to minimize disruption of building occupants. All I added here was that delayed implementation has to be evaluated using normative Annex X and reported in the management plan. So it's a very general statement. As we're discussing it here, I'm asking myself, well, should it be more specific? Does that hit the definition folks need to make sure they understand what's going on here? But that is your kind of delayed implementation route. Now there's more on that in our annex. I added one more thing here, which is verification of implementation of EEMs for buildings without comprehensive energy meters. So you've done the work, installed the measures. Your measures are supposed to produce the savings. And in the rest of the applicants, they're going to have to document that with their energy meters. What I've done here is adopt the procedures that we use for our energy service performance projects within state government, which is using the methods described in the International Performance and Measurement and Verification Protocol. That seems to cover it to me. Make sure that things are getting done well. It's a quality check. It's not a quantity check, though. It really isn't. And for that reason, I'm not altogether happy with it, but that's the best I could come up with. If others have a better way to do this, I'd love to hear about it. All righty. Those are our chapters. Anything on chapter 9?
We have a couple of questions that came.
Sure.
Okay, under the conditional compliance, when a building does not meet the listed EY, the building can do an energy audit and is obligated to complete the cost-effective measure. Even though that may not get the building to the target EY, will the building be considered in compliance? How is cost effectiveness defined?
We're going to cover cost effectiveness in a few minutes. Yes, if you have adopted and implemented your cost-effective package of measures, you will comply.
Okay. Next one, can you provide an example of a building without comprehensive metering? Is that like a where multiple buildings are served on one single meter?
That's correct. That's a good example.
Okay, that I'm just going to give a moment for them to type up anything else.
And we welcome anyone to just unmute and jump in the conversation.
I think we're ready to move on.
Yep, nothing has come in yet. All right.
Well, trying to find my
It's
next
safe to move
document. Okay. They want to see the whole story before they comment. So, normative Annex X is our, this is an early draft. We're not calling this a comment draft like the other stuff we've shared with you. I wouldn't mind if you commented off of this draft, but I'm just acknowledging that we're not sure we're done with this yet. But we wanted to bring it to this meeting to get some early comments that might help us finish it up. So once again, this investment criteria is required for folks who are seeking to essentially can't meet their target one way or another. They're not going to meet it because their energy use will be too high compared to their target. They're not going to meet it because they don't have a target, or they're not going to meet it because they don't have meters that allow them to demonstrate that they've met a target. Those are explained in the references that we just read in these sections that I've just pointed out here. And in this draft, I actually clipped those sections and put them in here to remind people what we're talking about. We just looked at it, so I'm going to move on for now. So that's when it applies. So when folks are using this process, you're going to have to complete level 3 energy audits on your package of measures. So that's essentially the first sentence. And it says, measure that provides maximum energy savings without resulting in a savings to investment ratio less than 1. That means that you'll have positive cash flow. You might not have positive cash flow in year 1 or 2, but throughout the life of the project, you'll have positive cash flow. The second one is the audit procedures for the investment criteria shall be based on standard 211, which I've talked about already. Section 5.5, level 3 audit. Now, I want to remind folks, we've said level 3, you've already stepped, in order to do level 3, you've already stepped through the level 1 and level 2 process. You've already done preliminary analysis on some of the measures. You may have even rejected a good number of measures. And so the level 3 really applies to the stuff that rose to the top and is being considered for the upgrade. And we're going to look at a chronology here in a little bit on that. Well, here it is, our chronology. So first you do the level 3 or the level 2 audit. You evaluate a comprehensive list of measures using basic financial screenings such as simple payback. And the subsection there is basically copied from the law that was created here. Individual measures that do not pay for themselves over the useful life of the measure may be excluded from further consideration. And we're suggesting that filter can be simple payback. That's good enough for getting you through the individual measure analysis using the level 2 procedures. Level 3 audit, once again, you start working on your optimized bundle of EEMs that provide maximum savings without resulting in a savings to investment ratio less than 1. The optimized bundle of measures shall be implemented based on the schedule established within the energy management plan. So here I have owner's discretion on extended useful life. So our law says that you may implement measures over an extended time period. So this is my attempt to roll that section of the law through the process. So the plan may include phased implementation such the builder owner is not required to replace systems or equipment before the end of their system's useful life. And then the second part is equipment operating beyond the documented service life. The cost and benefits of delayed implementation and the expected replacement schedule shall be included in the energy management plan. So you can delay it, but we want to see it on the schedule and we want to know when it's going to happen in the future. And we also want folks to think about the lost benefits that occur over that time period. It's not mandatory that you do the work, it's mandatory that you think about it. All right. All right, So that's a rough introduction to the scope. It doesn't really, I haven't gotten into the process yet, but you know, you see that we built in a few provisions from the law that allow people to, you know, some owner discretion around individual energy efficiency measures, as well as extending the projected useful life. Now let me roll down and talk about the economic criteria. So within standard 211, there is all the costs that are to be included with the life cycle cost analysis. We have added 3 statements to that because we know these are, well, they're not included or they're a subject of interest. So we added 3 statements. Common practice is a contingency fund around implementation of measures. We've included 5%. We're surprised that the standard didn't mention water savings related to energy efficiency measures. And this is when you do I'll take something simple, a shower head, and you put in low flow shower heads, it saves water heating energy. But it also has an economic benefit of reducing water use. And we want to make sure those are captured. So we've added that particular item. For these large buildings, something like a cooling tower and the evaporation avoided might be a more substantial outcome there. We've stated here that audit costs aren't included in this part of the evaluation. Everything in this, well, first of all, none of our standards, standard 211, commercial energy audit handbook, none of those say include the audit cost in the measure evaluation. In addition, you know, that is part of, that's how you got here, was by failing a whole bunch of conditions previously in the standard. So we think the energy audit is more a result of failing those conditions than it is of the energy audits. And I'm not even sure how you'd apply it to individual measures. So that's why we put it down there. We're open for comment. Now, included in this draft are a few items from standard 211 I copied. Here are all the things that 211 does list as things that would be included in the analysis. They refer back to, you know, the sub list of what cost of the EEM are included. It's quite extensive. So you can see the kind of level of detail that 211 has here that's going to be useful when we apply the standard. Finally, the life cycle cost methodology. So we're going to base the life cycle cost methodology on the NIST Life Cycle Costing Handbook. There are lots of steps there. I didn't plan to explain them all today. They're also, for the most part, contained within Standard 211. The advantage of the handbook here, the NIST handbook, is they have the actual formulas there. Now, for level 3 audits for life cycle cost, you're going to evaluate the bundle of measures using a life cycle cost methodology, which includes you know, a life cycle based on the longest life measure within the bundle. And so you will see, you know, application of things like inflation, changes in fuel cost over time, all those sorts of things. And this will be supported by some worksheets that Commerce develops. Now, there's some key variables that we thought we needed to define, simply because, you know, if people just got to pick their own variables, we'd have a whole range of opinions on what they should be. So we're stepping up and establishing particular methodology here. And the first thing is discount rates. And we've established two different discount rates, one for public building owners and another one for private building owners. And essentially what we're doing is we're establishing a discount rate that is the rate of borrowing. That creates a balanced equation between discounting and having to borrow money to do this work. So for public owners, we're basing it on the Washington State's Treasurer's Certificate of Participation Programs, which is a lending program available for energy efficiency work. It's available to all public entities in the state of Washington. It's a very good rate, and I encourage folks that don't have ready access to capital or don't want to leverage their own, say, municipal bond programs to go here. It stays off your bond books. So that's for public owners. And once again, this is the discount rate when calculating the way we discount future cost and benefits. Private owner discount rates, we sure went around in circles about this, and we settled on the Wall Street Journal prime rate. Lending can be substantially less or a little bit more than the prime rate, typically. Obviously, if you're not creditworthy, it can be much higher than prime rate. But we think we address that in the next section. Once again, trying to establish a balance between financing and discounting. So within financing, what we've done is we've chosen that the applicants with documented cost of borrowing, assuming 100% of the EBM implementation costs are financed at the actual cost of borrowing and stated terms. I should have read that differently. Actual cost of borrowing and stated terms when the property is being improved is listed as loan collateral. Well, it's a, so, you know, what's this is defined, even if you don't borrow all the money, you establish your financing rate used in your audit based on the idea that you're going to borrow all the money. And that it's going to be a pretty good loan because you have a fully collateralized loan. So what that does is it keeps the financing and the discounting relatively in balance with one another. And it does create what we think is a pretty fair way to balance all of the aspects of cost of implementation and this discount rate. Now, a couple other things have to be brought into this. One is the rate of inflation. The Office of Financial Management and State Government develops an inflation rate annually that we propose to simply adopt. It's based on national and state figures. Fuel escalation rate. And it's based on the NIST Handbook 135's annual supplement. So the Department of Energy every year updates this supplement and makes estimates of the price changes specific to fuels relative to inflation. So if inflation's 3% and they think electricity is going to cost 4% more in the first year, the escalation rate will be essentially +1. Now these folks also publish negative rates. A few years ago when all the natural gas rates went down, we had negative fuel escalation rates that were incorporated into the life cycle costing methodology. So we propose that we're going to adopt those fuel escalation rates. We're going to look for a simplified approach rather than entering each individual year on into the future in the way one methodology does. We'll probably bin them. So we can just apply a simple percent across all the fuel escalation rate. So study period, I've already said this once, but it's equal to the useful life of the longest lived energy efficiency measure within an optimized bundle. This is consistent with a lot of advice. I've listed the section in Standard 211 where that comes from. It's in the NIST handbook. You know, federal government used to specify 25 years. Now they specify 40 for everything. When we developed the law, folks didn't want to do the specific term. And so we're adopting this particular approach. Once again, this is an early draft. We're looking for comments, and so open the mic up now.
All right, we have a few questions and a comment, but this is back to the sections. Is PV deployment considered a measure?
I think so. It's a contractor cost, right? Tell me what PD means.
I can't say it. Photovoltaic. I think I said that.
PV.
Yeah, PV. Sorry.
Yeah, you can use PV. It's probably not your cheapest way, but it may be a way to nudge you along. Remember, I'm going to remind people, I think it's chapter 6 where they talk about energy management. No, O&M. It's probably chapter 5 where it's chapter 5 where you're doing your energy measurement. Chapter 5 describes how you do net energy, and you could apply that formula to see what your PV gets you. And I also want to say something, you know, that brings up an important note. While building owners are required to implement all the cost-effective measures as noted, you know, as the ones that flesh out through this economic criteria, they may also, you know, implement anything else they want. So if PV wasn't the cheapest way to get there, but it was the easiest, maybe that's the route to go. Next.
It's a comment. As written, it seems like the SIR must be more than one, but I don't think that is the intention in level 3 section. Did I say that comment right, Amy? I'm sorry.
Yeah. One or better.
I think it's
Did I write it incorrect? It's a weird language in the law. So.
Up above in section X1, 3, 2. Sorry.
There it is.
It just I don't think the intention is that. So I think.
Well, it's without resulting in a savings to investment ratio less than 1. At any rate, is it a confusing way to write it?
I'll provide a.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think I clipped that right out of the law, so I'm going to admit it's not the clearest language. Next.
Comment, water savings from EEM should include water and sewer saving costs. Cost savings, sorry.
Good comment. Good comment.
Next is a question. Does NIST offer a software solution to help folks calculate LCCA? I think a standardized tool will be helpful for folks.
I agree. They do offer a tool. It's horrible. The State Energy Office developed a tool for state agencies that does this, which we're likely to create a variant on that for this. We found that the methodology, well, the way we categorize matters is way too complicated, and we're going to try and we'll probably start with that tool and make it simpler. And I guess I could give people a reference to that tool. It's in Office of Financial Management's, what's it called? Capital Budget Forms. Life Cycle Cost Tool. At any rate, it's an example of work Commerce has done. We're also looking out in the world to some of these other systems, eProject Builder and such, to see if we can't find another tool someone else has developed. At any rate, you can do this with a spreadsheet, so that's the answer in short. And yes, Commerce will support that.
Next question, have you considered incorporating some social aspects into the discount rate?
Wow, there are whole papers on that. You know, this is evaluating building owner cost and benefits. And if you can figure out how to put your social aspects within that context, I think it'd be fair. I don't know what else to do. So if you had comments, send them in.
All right. Next comment, if PV is cost effective, then everyone can get to the EUI requirements.
Yeah, that'd be true.
Right. Another comment under LCCA cost section, would you see addition of regulatory fees, taxes, i.e. carbon taxes?
Well, carbon tax, sure, that's probably going to be part of your fuel cost, and it'll show up there. I don't know if folks have other ideas for carbon taxes. Both tax cost and tax benefits need to be included. And I'll tell you a really good one that just came along is a building owner with a certain kind of tax liability can fully amortize a piece of equipment in the first year and subtract it from their taxes. So basically, it's a 100% tax deduction in the first year. That's got a lot of value, and it should certainly be captured here. Of course, tax law changes, so that could change.
All right, just giving another moment for someone to in. The mic is also open for any questions for us or the call.
We have a question, Alan.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Are the disposal costs of replaced equipment and systems included in 5.48, I'm sorry, 5.4.8.1M?
I would think so, sure. Site-specific installation factors, number E. I think that covers it.
Okay. Last call.
Yeah.
That was the last one.
All right. I know Emily's gonna finish us off here, but I wanted to say thank you to everyone here from Commerce, and I also want a happy 50th anniversary of Earth Day out there to folks. I hope you'll take time to reflect and celebrate. There's a lot of good stuff online. I think there's an Earth Day 2050 website, and they're going to do both a noontime and a 2 p.m. show where a large variety of speakers from here in the Pacific Northwest each take 5 minutes to give a little talk. ACEEE has a webinar coming up for Earth Day that discusses how we can get, I think they said they can get halfway there with energy efficiency. I'm looking forward to dropping in and listening to that. So I think all the progress we've made over the years, it's well worth celebrating Earth Day.
Great. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you, Emily. Take her away.
Thank you, Chuck. Can everybody hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
All right. Wonderful. Well, hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well and staying healthy on this sunny afternoon. We, just the team here at Commerce, really wanted to just open up and invite a conversation about what we can be doing in light of our current circumstances with COVID-19 and remote working and just a change and shift in priorities that many of us have on our plates. What can we be doing to better meet your needs as we engage in stakeholder comments and continuing to move forward with this work? I know it can be difficult to facilitate discussion over a virtual meeting through WebEx. We do invite you to unmute your line if you've got thoughts that you want to share. Feel free to enter it into the chat box. Or following this webinar, we really do encourage you to email the building's email address and share your thoughts with us. We really want to be doing everything that we can to meet everybody where you're at in light of the current challenges and circumstances, and just really invite your ideas about how we can do a better job of that. So with that, I'm going to mute myself for a moment. Would love to hear thoughts if you want to share them. Again, feel free to type them into the chat box or email us after the fact, but just wanted to create some space for that discussion.
Thanks, Emily. This is Amy from the Northwest Energy Coalition. Given that we're all on billions of web meetings a week now, I might suggest, if it's possible in the future, think about some shorter, more frequent meetings to gather feedback. So I don't know if that would work for others, but I know I have a hard time being on the screen for 3 hours.
Thank you, Amy. Great suggestion. Annalyn or Austin, let me know if there's any comments that come in via the chat function. But with that, we will go ahead and conclude our webinar. A couple quick notes on upcoming dates. We've got comments due for ASHRAE Standard 100 Sections 7, 8, and 9 that Chuck just presented on. Comments are due on April 29th. We're shooting for the beginning of May to release draft language on Section 4 of ASHRAE Standard 100 and including many of the administrative procedures. And our next workshop will be following on May 21st. Just a reminder, feel free to sign up for updates. We do send out pretty frequent weekly, typically weekly buildings bulletins to stay abreast on current dates and events. So with that, Chuck, anybody else from the Commerce team, anything else for the good of the order?
Emily, there's a couple of questions and comments that came in. Are there any groups that we need? Sorry, let me scroll back up. For the Hospital Association, our priorities have completely shifted to COVID-19, which has challenged us on getting hospitals together on this rulemaking. Are there any groups that we need to particularly reach out to? I know some folks are laid off or furloughed right now. I'm trying to think creatively about how to include those groups. Any suggestions for outreach in this area? This is from Anna Beatty, who works for the buildings team. So any suggestions on how to outreach to this particular group of folks?
Yeah, Anna, thanks for that comment. Jeff and Lauren, I know have come to a number of our workshops. I'm wondering if they're on the line and have any suggestions or thoughts they want to share.
This is Lauren McDonald. Can you hear me?
Hey, Lauren.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much. So I had provided the first part of the comment around the Hospital Association's priorities totally shifting. So an example is I am currently the lead person on getting PPE we've imported from China from a warehouse to hospitals across the state. So that's just an example of how our staff have really been redeployed on this. And so gathering our hospitals to provide thoughtful feedback on this has been super challenging right now. And I'm wondering if there's any way to extend the comment deadlines so that we can meaningfully consider and provide feedback because, you know, as Chuck said at the top of the call, really getting specific ideas on proposals or language is most helpful to you all right now.
Yeah, Lauren, thank you so much for that comment. We are absolutely willing to consider extending the comment deadline. It would be helpful to better understand which particular sections you feel like would be helpful to comment on, and what are I know it's difficult. I mean, we can't really answer this, right? Like, what would a reasonable deadline be to you? But let's have that conversation. Let's talk more about it. And I invite that same discussion, with other folks as well. Let us know what's reasonable. We will do our best to be reasonable and accommodating wherever possible. So thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry, Lauren. I just kind of read through all the questions, so it was I mixed it in with Anna Beatty's question. But Anna's own is specifically about any groups who were, any folks who were laid off or furloughed. She's trying to think creatively about how we can include these groups. Any suggestions for outreach in this area for those individuals, or if you know anybody that we should be reaching out to that have been laid off or furloughed. You're always welcome to email us if you have anything you can think of. Another comment, seems like grocery association groups and restaurant associations that are affected by COVID will be in similar situation.
Thanks, Christine, for that comment.
Giving another moment. The Hospitality Association may be good to check in with. Anna?
Thank you, Lauren. Great suggestion.
Lauren also believes they represent the restaurant and hotels. Most restaurants wouldn't meet the 50,000 threshold, but hotels sure will. Well, I'm sorry, but hotels, I'm not sure.
There'll be some hotels in this mix.
Yeah. Thanks for those suggestions, Lauren. David has, from a hospital perspective, how about the Washington Healthcare Climate Alliance? Okay, thanks, David. Any other suggestions? Anyone? Last call. If you think of anything else, please email the building's email address. And we'll gladly take your comments and suggestions. Thanks.
As somebody that worked in college radio, dead air time is just horrible. So perhaps we should wrap it up.
Yeah, I don't know if Emily was on mute, but Emily, do you have anything else?
Wrap.
Okay, there we go. At any rate, thanks everybody for showing up today and participating. We look forward to your comments.
Okay, have a great day, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.